Welcome to the Legends Behind the Craft podcast, where we feature top leaders in the wine and craft beverage industry with your host, Drew Hendricks. Now, let's get started with the show.
Drew Hendricks here. I'm the host of the Legends Behind the Craft podcast, where I talk with leaders in the wine and craft beverage industry, from tech companies that enable wineries to run at an optimum efficiency, to today's guest, Joe Wagner, who's driving the winemaking innovation up and down the West Coast. Today's episode, it's sponsored by Barrels Ahead. At Barrels Ahead, we work with you to implement a one-of-a-kind marketing strategy, one that highlights your authenticity, tells your story, and connects you with your ideal customers. In short, we help wineries and craft beverage producers unlock their story to unleash their revenue. Go to barrelsahead.com today to learn more. I am super excited today to talk with today's guest, Joseph Wagner, founder of Copper Cane Wines and Provisions. Joe's a fifth-generation Napa Valley winemaker who's been immersed in every aspect of the wine industry his entire life. Joe forged his path to the top of the industry by creating Meiomi, a Pinot Noir with a bold flavor profile that was uncommon in Pinot Noirs at the time. The brand gained so much recognition that it became the focal point of the largest non-asset wine sale in history. This deal allowed him to fund his dreams, to expand his farming footprint throughout the West Coast through Copper Cane Wines and Provisions. Welcome to the show, Joe.
Thank you for having me, Drew. It's a pleasure.
Oh, thank you for being on. So, Joe, your name doesn't need much introduction, but tell us, what was it like growing up in Napa Valley?
Oh God, when I was growing up, it wasn't all that long ago. I'm almost 40, but it was a much more farming focused community, much more rural. You didn't have all the glitz and glamour like you do today. You had a few wineries and a few that were becoming more glamorous. But that all didn't start really until the late 90s. And when I was growing up, I was fortunate. I look back on it and think that I'm fortunate to have had to work with my dad, and not under him, but I'd be in the field crews, I'd be leafing, dropping crop, whatever it was we needed to do. And then as I got older into my teens, he allowed me to work into the winery, where it is a little more dangerous, so you don't want a kid working in there. Mm-hmm. But got to get my feet wet with it. I didn't initially think that I was going to get into grapes or wine until I got out of grapes and wine, and realized very quickly that this is an amazing industry. You're taking a product from Mother Nature, and you're able to capture it in a vessel and share it for years to come. And beyond that, just from a working standpoint, it's agriculture, it's chemistry, it's artistry, it's industrial elements as well. So you have a really broad array of elements in this industry, and I didn't realize it until I got out of it. I mean, it's all I knew growing up.
What were you doing when you were out of it?
Quickly came back. Actually got into to photography for a while. Really enjoyed that, and then communications, and realized it was those were fun businesses, but they also weren't going to be where I think my life path wanted to head, and got back into agriculture, and that was the part that I missed the most.
And that must have given you a lot of perspective. So when you went back into it, is that when you founded Meiomi?
Well, first it was the first vintage of Belle Glos was what started it all. So before Pinot was cool, before Sideways, I remember that. So what a change in the wine world that brought. So I started Belle Glos in 2001, and it was an uphill battle, honestly. Pinot Noir from California was not a highlight of the wines we produced here in California as far as what the consumers wanted. And I realized quickly that I needed something that could be offered in a by the glass on-premise setting in restaurants, and came up with a philosophy for the 2002 vintage of Meiomi, which at the time was just Sonoma Coast. It was 3 vineyards, and then we expanded upon that. But it was really a way for us to get not just our name of Belle Glos, which was called Belle Glos Meiomi at the time. It was a way for us to get people acquainted with California coastal Pinot Noir. And that worked very well for us. And fortunately, people liked the wines, and they thought there was value in the price, and it brought a lot of exposure to Belle Glos in general. And then Sideways hit, and our world was turned upside down, and you couldn't keep Pinot Noir in stock. And that gave us another opportunity, and that opportunity was to expand our farming footprint and also our production to be able to satisfy the thirst of Pinot Noir lovers across the land.
Oh, that's amazing. On the Meiomi category, like what was your vision was to expand the brand, but it had a very, I mean, it was a pretty bold wine. I remember when it came out.
So I guess I go back to the beginnings of really kind of California wine and when it really started to see its upswing. And one thing I learned from my dad was, and I think he was one of the first to do this, rather than emulating Bordeaux here in Napa Valley with Cabernet, he realized that there was a terroir all its own here, and he started to create much more robust Cabernets than what the old world created. And that goes back to the 70s, and that garnered a lot of attention. Just people liked the flavor profile and the texture better than the old world in many cases. So he instilled that philosophy in me. And so when I started making Pinot Noir, which is something my family had not done for decades, I took that same approach and thought, let's not try to emulate Burgundy. Let's create wines that express the land. And here in California, yes, we can have cool temperatures across the coast, but we also have a lot of sunlight. And we also have other dynamics in the weather like wind that play a role in the thickness of the skins and therefore the richness and texture of the wines. And so we really focused on that beginning with Belle Glos and took that philosophy to a kind of broader flavor profile with Meiomi, because we were working with so many different vineyards, where Belle Glos was focused on single vineyards. Meiomi was focused on just a broader array of coastal vineyards. So yeah, that's what we did. And, I thought the wines tasted good, and fortunately, people did too. In the beginning, though, I was not getting good scores. The critics were looking for something more Burgundian, and I was a little disheartened by that. But I felt like, with a philosophy of going to restaurants and restaurants being able to pour it by the glass, that people would be exposed to it and really go with their palate, which is one of our philosophies. You empower the people that are actually drinking wine and enjoying their meal to decide what they like, rather than having one person tell them what they should like.
That's great insight. So this led up to what I just described as a non-asset sale. Explain that to us.
Yeah, so non-asset sale, they knocked on the door about 2 years before we actually got a deal done. That was Constellation. And initially just told them, no, we're not interested. It wasn't something I had planned on ever doing. And so, 2 years later, they finally just asked, hey, let us just see some of the financials. And we'll make an offer. And I said, okay, well, go ahead and do that. We'll go that far. And they put just a crazy multiple based on EBITDA out there. And it came out to a very big number. And so we thought, okay, let's look at this seriously now. Now, when we're, the first negotiations, so to speak, were about, what is it that they wanted to buy? And so they wanted to buy everything. And I just said, absolutely not. Never selling Belle Glos. That's, named after my grandmother. That was my founding brand. And that's one that's near and dear to my heart. And so it just came down to only Meiomi. And when I say no asset sale, there was no physical winery, no physical tasting room, no physical vineyards. This was just the brand name and any other information we had on the brand as far as where we were selling it. And then the inventory that we had currently at the time. And so that's no assets means we didn't lose any of our land, which was another important thing to me. But that sale really, gave us the opportunity to expand our farming operations. I'm a big believer that we can make better wines if we're controlling things soup to nuts. So we're able to buy a piece of property, like we just bought a Santa Rita Hills property about 6 years ago, planted it, and we've got our first vintages coming off of that. And that's a beautiful piece, and we're able to make some great Pinot Noirs and Chardonnays off of it. And so we've done that. We're going about 200 to 300 acres per year to satisfy the growth of our brands and continue growing better grapes and making better wines.
That's amazing. So Meiomi used that as a springboard for copper cane.
Exactly. And the interesting thing about Meiomi was I got into the fine wine business, where you're talking 10 or 20,000 cases is a pretty good sized production, right? Well, we were making over 500,000 cases of one product, the being Meiomi, at the time of the sale. And I kind of looked at it and thought, this thing is kind of wagging the dog. This is running me. No, I'm not running it. And I kind of felt like, this will bring balance back to not just my life, but our business and our philosophy, and get us more, entrenched back into the fine wine world. And so that was one of the things I think was actually most tempting about that opportunity.
That's some pretty good advice. So you're almost a victim of your growth there, where suddenly you became like, I don't want to be running 500,000 cases.
Exactly. You take on the challenge and then you realize, wait, this isn't what I got in the business for.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. So then you kind of retooled everything with Copper Cane, where now you have a series of brands that allows you to keep that kind of micro focus.
Exactly. And each brand really does have a micro focus. With Elawan, it's only about Oregon. Started experimenting up there in 2012. We make a Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and a Rosé up there. We actually make the wines down here in California in Rutherford. But all the grapes are grown up there in the coastal hills of Oregon. And then Bowen was a recreation of what Meiomi was, I'd like to say, on its best day. So Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and that was something that I wanted to recreate, but kind of keep, contained, right? Not let it get crazy like Meiomi did. And then Belle Glos, of course, still vineyard designated Pinot Noirs. Quilt was a Napa Valley focus, or still is a Napa Valley focus with Cabernet, a red blend, and Chardonnay. And then we have a few other smaller brands like Stiora and Baron that are kind of incubator brands, just having fun with those and their passion projects.
That's me. What were the early, like when you first started Copper Cane, what were some of the challenges that you faced coming right out of this Meiomi transaction?
I'd say that I didn't feel like we had too many challenges. Coming out of the Meiomi transaction, the challenge we had was that we were no longer as relevant to the distributors as we were with Meiomi. So in saying that, it's if you have a brand that is just purely pull sales, pulling through the marketplace, so it's like we could almost produce as much of it as we could, and it would just sell on its own. Distributors love that, right? They're taking an inventory and then they're distributing it out there, and they're making a good cut on it. If they don't have to have their salespeople focusing on it and spending their resources, then it's a brand they truly love. When Copper Cane started, of course, Belle Glos was already established, but we had a lot of smaller brands that were just beginning. So getting the attention from the distributor to those brands specifically was a bit of a challenge. I think that what we were able to do though was we have our own way of going about sales. We don't just rely upon the distributors. So we have our team members out there. I'm out there myself, and winemaking, or the other people on the team get out in the marketplace as well. So it's about telling the story, tasting the wines, getting people to understand what it was we're doing, what our next kind of phase of Copper Cane is, or next phase of our part in the business is. And we were able to grow the brands really from the ground up, and they've all become relatively relevant brands in their own categories.
Yeah, absolutely. As far, how are the brands structured? Do you have independent management of your different brands?
That's a great question. So we have only really one philosophy and one team.
Mm-hmm.
So that was something that I saw in a lot of the other companies out there, where they kind of would collect brands or create brands, and then you create an estate, and you have a winemaking team and a marketing team and whatever else in this silo, and it all rolls up. Like, not to single anybody up, but like Jackson Family is a good example of that, right?
Thinking of that.
So they each one of the brands is standalone, has an estate, and rolls up to kind of the bigger umbrella portfolio. I like the philosophy of, I started off growing grapes, and I got into making wine, and then started building a team. And I think that our philosophies in grape growing and winemaking are very important, and we can't employ those properly if we're not all in one site. So we make all of our wines in one location. Growing grapes in different locations, that's not a problem. We can do that. We can manage that from logistics and everything. That works out well. But being able to really put what I'd call put the screws to the grapes to make the wines that we want to make with the philosophy at hand that we have at Copper Cane, we need to do that in one location. And so that's what we do. So it's really one, the brands themselves have a unique focuses, but it is a shared philosophy amongst the entire portfolio.
That's pretty brilliant, because you allow all the brands get to share that same economies of scale, and you don't have all that independent stuff.
That is another benefit.
One of the biggest challenges the smaller wineries face is they just don't have the infrastructure to actually scale it up.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what's it like putting on your hat so today I'm talking about Belle Glos. Today I'm talking about this. How do you shift the mindsets between the brands?
It's everything kind of naturally schedules itself out, I guess, so, with like our earliest, let's call it, we're in harvest right now. So we've got rosé in the barn, right? We're fermenting that through. We're just starting to pick Pinot Noir. We're going to start Chardonnay shortly after that, and then we'll get into Cabernet. So as you think about the life schedule or the aging life of a wine, we're going to start off with rosé beginning of the year, getting our blends together, cold and heat stabilization, bottling. Shortly after that, we'll start looking at our Chardonnays, our early season Chardonnays. We also have longer term Chardonnays that age longer. And then Pinot after that, which generally, is about a 9 to 10 month aging cycle in barrel. And then Cabernet generally goes out from 15 to 24 months. So you kind of are able to work through each one, individually, just how the schedule pans out naturally. We're not looking to have, 100 different products or SKUs. We just want a nice, tight, consolidated portfolio that each wine has a place and a reason for being. And so I don't think we're ever going to get kind of, so scatterbrained and having to go out and try to juggle things, and eventually having things slip through the cracks.
That makes sense. What? Oh, wait, I was thinking what? Oh, sorry. So as far as the quilt, so I do want to talk to you because your family has pretty much invented Cabernet in Napa Valley. How do you? What's your thumbprint on Cabernet, and how are you shipping that category?
So, Cabernet is still king, right? It's king of the reds. It is a very loved varietal across the world, especially across the nation here. And so I started, while I started with Belle Glos and Pinot Noir in 2001, I started making Cabernet with my dad for Camus in 2004, and did that up through 2014 when I started Copper Cane. So got to learn a lot about Cabernet. I actually started in farming Cabernet before I got into winemaking. So got to really kind of understand, things in what you do in the vineyard and how it affects the grapes to affect change in the wine, and then how you can take those experiments or those learnings and apply them to other vineyards, and just continue to kind of up the ante, make things better and more consistent every year. And that was something that I took on very seriously. So when I started Copper Cane and eventually Quilt, the philosophy with Quilt wasn't, like a vineyard designated character. I don't believe that Napa Valley Cabernet does well when you're specific to one site. The reason I say that is you take a cool area like Coombsville down in the southern portion of Napa, and in a hot year, those wines are absolutely gorgeous and phenomenal. But in a cool year, they can be green and vegetative. Calistoga being our most northern and one of the warmest areas of Napa Valley, it's the opposite. Hot years, they get very drab and almost cloying, and they don't have the structure and acidity that you need. And then in cool years, they're perfect. So going with that philosophy of saying, we've got from Coombsville in the south to Calistoga in the north, and these mountain regions like Atlas Peak and Howell Mountain, we can create this stylistically driven Napa Valley Cabernet that delivers consistent quality every year. And that gives us a much broader array of tools, so to speak. So we have more of a palette to be able to create something that is true to Napa Valley's form, but consistent and high quality every year.
That makes sense. As far as Napa Valley, so as far as the grape prices and Cabernet Sauvignon, it is king both for prices. Yeah. Do you see a risk of Napa Valley just becoming Cabernet because that's where the money is?
Yeah, that's already happening. Absolutely. By and large, the majority of land here is good for Cabernet. It is the right variety to plant. You get closer to the river with heavier soils, that should be more like Sauvignon Blanc, maybe Petit Syrah or Merlot, Zinfandel. Zinfandel does great here. It's just those are the sad ones. When you see these historic Zin vineyards come out and new Cabernet vineyards going, you're like, that was 80 years of tradition, But yeah, when you get down to areas like even in parts of Carneros, where there are people planting Cabernet, I think that's a mistake. But at the end of the day, I think if you're a grower and you're faced with, am I going to get $2,000 per ton or $8,000 per ton? And people don't care, or they're going to run it through flesh to taunt and blow off all the green pyrazine characters. And it comes out as, Napa Valley Cabernet. Doesn't matter. So yeah, there is some risk in that, but I think that still, by and large, the majority of the varietal of Cabernet and the vastness of where it does well throughout Napa Valley, it will continue to deliver high quality, much more often than not.
That's a good point. I mean, yeah, you can plant the Cabernet on the fringes and put the name on it, but it may not be the best varietal for that location.
Not the best decision. Not the best decision.
So I want to step back for a second. The name Copper Cane. Tell us about where that name came from.
So when we started Copper Cane, I was looking for a name. It's not something that people out there buying wine are really going to see. They'll see it on the back labels as kind of our portfolio name. But for me, it was really just about our philosophy. What kind of ties everything together with our philosophy? And this was the foundation point. And that is really about, when we decide to pick, how we assess maturity. The standard in the business is to look at, I'll call it the chemistry, but typically it's the sugar. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I remember growing up on the crush pad and, I'd answer the phone on the crush pad and be a grower. And, I'd say, hey, Dad, it's Doug White or something. And he'd go, well, tell him if it's 24 bricks to pick. And that's, measurement of soluble solids. That's really the sugar content in the grapes. And the thing that, and this is no longer how Caymus operates either, but the way that people look at that is every year you're picking just based on sugars or what we'd say potential alcohol after fermentation. But every year is different. You might have a lot of heat spikes with a light crop. You might have a cool year with a heavy crop. So you're not going to have the same sugar accumulation as you do with the physiological maturity of the grapes and the vine. So one thing that I always saw as a common factor was what we call copper cane. And that is when you start to see the canes, which start off as, succulent green tissue. And once you get into ripening, they begin to lignify and get, hard and brown and a copper color. And that slowly migrates up this whole cane. So we want to see all of that cane turn to a copper color, meaning kind of a purging of the green in the vine and therefore purging of the green in the grapes and the wine. And so that kind of became the foundational philosophy about how we assess maturity, how we pick for consistency so that we have something that is going to deliver what is expected year in and year out.
That's great. I mean, that's a great way of describing it.
I don't have a knife on me, but if you give me 1 second,
Sure.
I think I can grab one of these.
We're looking at the clear blue skies of Sonoma right there, which is good. We want to see blue skies.
Right. So I just pulled a shoot off.
Oh yeah.
So you can see here at the base of the shoot, you can see that copper color.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So, and then as you come up towards the tip, this is a Cabernet vine. You can see that it migrates from that copper color over to that green.
Oh, absolutely.
So we want to see this entire shoot be copper in color. So we're a few weeks off still with this, but typically if you're picking based off of sugars, you're not going to be looking at those attributes. And so that was something that was important to me and really a foundational component. Oh, I'm glad I have the vineyard behind me.
Pardon?
I said I'm glad I have the vineyard behind me.
I was just noticing you've got nice clear blue skies there. Let's hope they stay that way.
Yeah. We've had a couple of years of wildfires that were difficult, but so far this year it's been great. I think we're going to actually have finally a good and calm year.
You're due for it. You guys are due for a calm year.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yep.
Talking about, so what's your vision? So in 5 years, where do you see Copper Cane growing and evolving?
The brands we currently have, we're not really, going to be creating too many more. I do have a little pet project we're doing right now because I love some of the red blend categories. So we are going to be doing something small on that, which will be a Rhone-based blend, an Italian-based blend, and a Spanish-based blend. So we've been planting, a couple experimental varietals. We'll see how that goes, but that'll be something fun. But overall, it's really just, I think continuing to drive the love of fine wine and encouraging people to try new things, not just new wines, but new food and wine pairings. Get out of the box. If you're having, a spicy pad thai throw, an Oregon Pinot in the ice box for 15 minutes to chill it down a little bit and see how that reacts. I think that one thing I'd love for people to get, more acquainted with is thinking that wine, maybe I should say every food out there has a wine that will pair with it. I think we oftentimes think, tacos need a Pacifico or a Corona, right? But
Mm-hmm.
like, get some carne asada street tacos and try it with a Zin. You're going to be very surprised at how good it is. So getting people just acquainted with kind of opening their mind to wine, not just being something that elevates your experience with food, but it really elevates everyday life. And so we're going to be pushing on that long term. There are a couple things from a I would call it kind of political standpoint, which I know we don't like to get into those things, but California is not a very easy place to do business, as I'm sure you've.
Well, I'm based in California too. Yeah,
exactly.
No, challenging.
It has its challenges, and so we're actually looking at how we can move some of our kind of end of production, warehousing and that sort of stuff out of state, so that we can be more efficient. In all honesty, 80% of our product goes to the east of the Sierras. So it makes more sense from a logistics standpoint and efficiency standpoint to look at those options, and what portion of our business we can move out there and not affect the quality. I think that's the core piece of it. So we're always going to make our wines here in California. Always going to finish them here in California. But from a warehousing standpoint, is California the right place? Just little things like that. And 5 years down the road, I've got kids. My eldest are twins at 15. And I, really, one of the reasons for creating Copper Cane was to create a, potential for my kids to get involved and carry on the torch.
Have they caught the bug?
They work every summer, and they enjoy it. They've done, everything from production, warehousing, winemaking. So they're doing racking. They have not gotten into harvest or anything yet, which I think next year they'll be able to, as far as operating machinery. That's where, I don't want an accident to happen. So.
Gotta have your driver's license.
Yeah. No forklifts yet. And yeah, they've done everything in the vineyard from planting to every aspect. So, I've got, I think my highest earner this last summer, he worked his ass off, pardon my French, and loved it. And he made about $2,300, which, and he's not being paid a very high wage. He's being paid an honest wage. So he's entry level, but I was really proud of him for that. And I think maybe like me, they may go out, and I'll encourage them to go out and pursue a dream. And if they realize that this industry is for them, that they have an open door to come back in and learn. All you got to do is work your butt off and care about the future of the company. So that's kind of where I start to see 5 years down the road, when maybe in college or whatever it may be, and realizing that they might want to get in. And that's where that's something I'm excited about, is bringing the next generation in.
Sixth generation.
Yeah.
It's amazing. That's amazing. So tell me about this provisions aspect of Copper Cane wine and provisions.
Yeah, so we do. You'll find these items, in our tasting room. But I like everything to be kind of high quality and purposeful, right? So, and oftentimes these things kind of carry on to things that I personally love. I love playing cards, and so we decided that we'd make our own custom deck of cards. Everything down to doing all of our own illustrations for the face cards and all that. So just very, very nice sets of things like cards, sunglasses, whatever it may be, that kind of crosses our mind that we think people may enjoy, and may kind of like just trigger a memory back if they had a great time here in Napa Valley and they tasted the Copper Cane wines, and they go play a game of solitaire or something. It's hopefully it's something like that. So that's kind of the provision side. A much smaller part of our business. We also do cigars, which I started doing that 6 or 7 years ago, to be paired specifically with wines. And so we do 2 different types of cigars.
Interesting.
that are, they're not available throughout the U.S., but there are some markets that we do have them available.
Now tell me about the cigar and wine pairing, because
So this goes back to like my harvest nights. I don't smoke as much as I used to, but but during harvest, every night I would be doing paperwork, and then we have this thing we call the board. It's just a big whiteboard, and we use permanent marker, and then we erase it when we're done with it with high proof alcohol. We do that so that it doesn't, drip off if you accidentally spray it with a hose.
smart.
And so that is our work order for the day or the next day. And so every night I'd, be there, it might be 10, 11 o'clock, and I'm just getting everything kind of written out so that, everybody knows what tomorrow morning looks like when we start up at like 4 a.m. And so I would always have a cigar when I did that. And I just enjoyed cigars, and eventually started talking to people about producing our own, and came up with some custom blends. And the goal was to, like some people really love Maduros, right? They're very big, very powerful. But oftentimes they can be very, very stripping of the characters of a wine, and overpowering, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So we started looking at wines that would pair, cigars that would pair well with our style of wine. And came up with two different blends. One we call the Habano, and one is a Connecticut shade grown wrapper. So they both are kind of like, one is medium, one is light bodied, which I think go very well with a broad array of wines. And they don't really have any dry components to them. So that was kind of the goal, is to how do you create a cigar that really pairs well with a wine and makes that experience much more enjoyable.
Well, no, I do like a good cigar. Usually I'm doing it with a single malt, but
now that'll stand up to it, right? You can take a Maduro and enjoy a great single malt with it, and they're gonna highlight each other. So it's with the wine thing, it's just you can rip your palate open, and your wine tastes like garbage.
I may have made that mistake once or twice. Talking about your passion, so you left the wine for photography. Are you still shooting photos?
I do. So that was one thing that carried on with that. So it's still a hobby. I still love doing it. Used to do all the photography for our websites and whatnot, and since now I don't have time for that as much as I used to, but still love doing it. So I still shoot. I've got a couple cameras. I moved over to digital. I started on film. I miss film, honestly.
I do too.
But at the same time, I don't think I'd have the time to be doing all my own development and all that like I used to, and printing. So this has made it very convenient. And of course, all the post work with Photoshop and stuff, it's ridiculous how easy it is. But yeah, I still love shooting.
What's your favorite subject other than your vineyards?
I'd still say landscape is still kind of like what I love doing. And the beauty of being in areas like the coast of California, and if you're out there early enough, just for that kind of reverse twilight hour, like just before the sun is about to come up, sometimes you get some beautiful stuff that most people don't typically get to see. So your cloud formations, the way the light's hitting them, the direction of the light, because it's not typically, people are typically thinking, twilight hour coming, in at the evening. So that's always a lot of fun.
Yeah, you can definitely see that kind of tone translating on your website. I mean,
right.
Whether or not you took the pictures or not, you can see that your vision is coming out there.
Well, thank you.
I used to take a lot of photos. I regret I've got a whole wall of cameras back there, but I sadly don't take them out as much as I used to.
Yeah, I think that happens once we get into a profession.
It is, and also having the phone on you all the time, it makes it a little bit easier. It's
way too convenient. And they're honestly, they're pretty darn good photos.
They are getting better every year. Sometimes
Yeah.
I used to have the big camera, the real camera, and then I'd have the phone. And I'm kind of like, man, the image on the phone's better.
Yeah,
I don't have the big backpack.
It does something with the lighting that there's like a cheat code in your iPhone. I don't know what it is, but it does a good job.
Oh yeah. No, so as we wrap down, I want to kind of ask you, when you're not drinking Copper King wines, what are you drinking these days?
I really am into some of the Spanish reds right now, both from Spain and also locally here. So really experimenting with that. I love Riesling, in particular Alsatian Riesling. That's something that we've kind of started as a pet project here to try, and it actually was at that Santa Rita Hills vineyard. We planted a little bit of Riesling down there, and it's on the very western edge of Santa Rita Hills in extremely high calcium soils. So it's kind of like, if there's a place that it should work, it's there. So we'll see how that turns out. But I've always loved that just very mineral, petrol driven style of Riesling. And I would love to see something like that come out of California. I think we all just think California Riesling is going to be sweet. That's, I don't know if that's because of the Blue Nun effect from years ago or what, but it's I think that if there's a will, there's a way. You can make a style, that has those characters, but is still Californian in nature. So that's it. And, sparkling wine, absolutely love. I mean, there's some great domestic sparkling wines here. Schramsberg with their J. Schramm, even Domaine Carneros with the Le Rêve, but a lot of the champagne houses as well. And I love Brut Nature, just zero dosage that's my jam.
No, I agree. And I would love to see a steely mineral dry Riesling.
Hey, as soon as we get one, I'll send you one. I had some. Scribe was actually really good.
Oh,
I don't know if you've had Scribe. Yeah, they're doing a great job with some Riesling over here in Sonoma.
Oh man, I got to check that out.
Yeah.
So Joe, thank you so much for joining us. Where people can pretty much find you, but where can people find you? I got to ask that.
So, I think nowadays I would say, Facebook, of course, I think we have a pretty good presence on there with the brands individually as well as Copper Cane, but really the brand focused ones I think are the best places to go. So Belle Glos, Ella1, Quilt, etc. But Instagram, if everybody's on Instagram, we do try to post a lot of our highlights, what's going on. And we do have, our Copper Cane account, which is a little more business focused. We also have there's a guy that is on the team named Chris Paul Rutherford. That's his handle, Chris Paul Rutherford, and he kind of gives a behind the line scene of what we do at Copper Cane, everything from events we do to production, winemaking, harvesting, etc. So that's, I think, a very fun one to watch, and I've kind of given him open access to trail anybody in the company or myself to get information and see what's going on. So we want people to see what it is that we do, because it's not that easy to do in the wine business. If you go to a local brewery, they're going to show you the grain, the mash and what comes out the other end and the actual beer. And you see all that in real time. In the wine world, it's kind of like we have this massive inundation of busyness during harvest, and we're relegated to one location. So it's really hard to expose those elements to a broad audience. So, thank God for social media to give us that opportunity so people can get a closer tie to actually what goes into growing grapes and making wine.
Well, that's excellent. Instagram has really made that possible. And a great point about visiting wineries. It really depends on the time you go and what you're going to see.
It very much so.
Well, Joe, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. This has been a pleasure.
Oh, it was a great pleasure. And I look forward to doing this again. And if you find yourself up in Napa or any of your listeners, look us up. We've got a tasting room called Quilt and Company in downtown Napa, a restaurant called Avow. And you could also reach out directly to us online, just at our info at Belle Glos or info at Quilt or any of the brands. If you guys are looking for something more special. So we'd love to host you guys up here. I'd love to host you, Drew. So feel free, let us know when you come on up.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. And if you're ever down in San Diego,
will do.
Hit me up.
Hey, thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Legends Behind the Craft podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.